for coming to attend this session on SDG3, which is around good health. So on behalf of the Impact Investment Council, I'd like to welcome you all to this session. I'm LM Singh. I represent IP Global here, and I lead USAID's innovation and financing platform called PEHEL. And I'm delighted to see some of the senior leadership of USAID here as well. So thank you for coming, Mark, Ramona. My role here today is to moderate and not to sort of just give our views, but rather share your input, share your thoughts on how can this sector, which is so essential for the well-being and the socio-economic development of the people, how do we really catalyze this? Just to sort of put it in context, in the last 25 years, India has seen a rapid transformation of its economy, as many of you know. It used to be less than $300 billion when the liberalization started and started shedding root. Today you have close to $3 trillion of an economy. So imagine an 8-fold increase in an economy in 25 years. What that has done is that on one side, created a lot of opportunities, but if you look at from the context of wealth distribution, there are less than 1,000 people who control 24% of the GDP, roughly $800 billion. So while we have solutions and economic welfare, at the same time as India is moving into a middle income status country, you have roughly 500 million, if not more, of its population who live below $10 a day. And if you translate that $10 a day of 500 million people and look at it from a global context, you're looking at more than 3 to 4 billion people who need healthcare or healthcare solutions and other basic necessities. So that's one dimension of where India stands today in terms of the wealth which is there and which can be deployed towards the sort of the impactful area of health. On the other side, you look at it from a health perspective. Clearly, rapid urbanization has led to many people coming into cities. Our cities have overgrown. We have more than 400 million people living in our cities today, and 100-odd million represent what I would call the urban poor or the near poor. That's an official number. My sense is that that number would be probably closer to 500 million. So with this rapid urbanization, what has led to a new lot of people who are insecure in terms of access to healthcare. And the third dimension, if you look at it from a spending pattern, India carries 21% of the global disease burden, 21%. And it's shifting from communicable to non-communicable. You have the cardiac, the diabetes, and so on. And these cost a lot of money. And then we are spending less than 4.5% of our GDP towards healthcare. So clearly it's a huge gap if India has to meet the needs of its people. So in that context, I'd like to welcome you all and set the stage for this discussion. I think in a situation where you have 21% disease pool and 4.5% odd of GDP is being spent, 70% of that is in private hands. How do you really catalyze solutions which are low cost, which are innovative? I think the time is there. So in terms of what India can do from an impact perspective, it's the second largest, I would say, sector getting attention today, about 16% of impact investment into it. So I would welcome you all for this sort of discussion, and I have some interesting people to help us to sort of give their perspective and share their views. So on my right is Charles Antion. Charles, welcome. And Charles is the CEO and founder of Coes Invest. I have Sunil Thakur, who actually runs one of the India-focused healthcare funds called Quadria. I have Krishna, who runs, again, an impact fund looking at models and successes and stories, both from community and from an impact perspective. And we have a legal view from Rahul. So they can perhaps, as we go forward, share a bit more about their background and then their work out here. So I'd like to sort of lead this discussion around sharing views of people sitting next to me and then open it up for every one of us to contribute. Our goal is to take everyone's view input, and I'm sure that can then help us to translate into action later. So Charles, let me first start with you. Clearly, you've been doing a lot of innovative financing stuff on your own through Quace Invest, whether it's on the impact bond side or the fund investment side. And you've also done it globally. So how do you see India and what lessons do you see which can be drawn to catalyze this affordable health sector?
Thanks, Elena. The reason why I moved back to India after having run a pharma company here from 2007 to 2010 is because passionate about global healthcare access, I'm convinced that India is the capital of the world in terms of healthcare access solutions. And why is that? It's because the need is gigantic. As Alan said, it's between 500 to 700 million people who don't have access to decent healthcare in the country. But at the same time, it's one of the countries in which there's the most reverse engineering, the most number of creative coders, and the most number of entrepreneurs per inhabitant. And so that combination of government had previous to Ayushman Bharat had not stepped in, huge needs and huge entrepreneurial and technological skills means that there's a lot of the innovations that are going to provide healthcare access not only in India but also in low-cost Asia, low-cost Latin America and in Africa are coming out of there. Are coming out of here in India. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the fund that we've set up in partnership with Quadria, Health Quad. A lot of our companies are not only performing fantastically well financially, generating so far 52% IRR, but most importantly, their solutions are now being exported all across the world. Now, that being said, we all know that there's a huge need to bridge the GDP spend that's abnormally low in India at 4%, the out-of-pocket expenses much too high at 67%, and the fact that the physical infrastructure, where the number of beds per 1,000 inhabitants is only at 0.8 versus 3.9 in China and 13.2 in Japan and 2.9 in the US. And then there's the human capital that we have to bridge with the number of nurses being here only 2.1 while it's 11.3 in the US and 2.4 in China. And on the doctor side, it's no better with 0.8 physicians per 1,000 inhabitants versus 2.6 in the US. So how do we get there? There's on one hand those innovations that are really answering to the challenges that the government, that the providers, the suppliers, the doctors, and the urban population have. And then there's the catalytic changes. I think a lot of the innovations are, on one hand, focusing on improvement in issues in urban centers that are really one type of issues and solutions that are needed. Sunil can speak about these. The other one is the mismatch between the location of the resources that we see. 30% of the population in rural areas need to walk 30 kilometers to have primary care. And why is that? It's because 70% of the medical infrastructure is in urban centers. So innovations are an answer. I think another answer is catalyzing the different players, and that's what we're doing in cancer care, for example, where we're working with Roche and with Tata Memorial Hospital, so that the 5-year survival rate that we're seeing in breast cancer in India, that's on average 55%, and compares to 92% in the US, but also compares to 85% in Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai. And so what is actually needed to spread the success that is already existent in some very small pockets in India around Tata Memorial Hospital? Well, in that case, we think that it's a multi-partner intervention that's required. And so it's about working on disease awareness and diagnostics, while at the same time it's about working on quality of care. So that means really translating the quality of care that's present at Tata Memorial Hospital to 12 hospitals that are amongst the 22 largest players in oncology in the country, but where survival rates are really, really low. So use of technology plus education to bring up the standards, and then access to drugs, making them affordable through various innovative finance schemes. And we're also working on interventions of the kind in menstrual hygiene to work on awareness at the same time as construction and cleanliness of toilets, and at the same time distribution of pads, as well as we are in primary care. And there, obviously, Ayushman Bharat is a huge jump forward, but it's only a partial one, and they're very open about it. If we look at the financing needs to reach the 2030 SDGs, it's about approximately 880 billion. The government is expected to spend 500 billion of that, but that means that there's a 300 billion left. And the 300 billion is not going to come alone from venture capital and private equity. It's going to come from industrial players, but it's also going to come through leveraging and tranching of financial needs. And there's a waking up ongoing in India, but so far India has really been driven predominantly by grant money on one side and high return-seeking capital on the other side, and the blending has barely taken place. If we compare what we see in Africa, where we've structured a series of innovative finance instruments in healthcare, I'd say India is maybe 10 years ahead, 15 years ahead, not only in terms of the pool of entrepreneurs, some in the number of healthcare tech entrepreneurs, but also in the speed at which we're seeing changes amongst all the actors. So I'm an Indophile. I find this country a fascinating country that I love, and I'm delighted to be working here for the second time in my career, so I might have a somewhat biased view. But despite all the challenges and the roadblocks that are here, I'm very confident that in 15 years from now it's going to be a totally different context, and that a lot of the healthcare revolutions that will have changed access to healthcare for the other 3 billion, be it in Africa, be it in other parts of Asia, will have come out of India.
Thank you, Jas. So then let me ask you your views. Clearly, if you had to create an impact, government is a big stakeholder. You cannot really reach that infrastructure, the people you seek to reach without the government support. So we've seen certain schemes both from the national level and the state levels come up to sort of give more financing support through Ayushman Bharat, which is a fairly large scheme reaching out to 100 million families, 80% in rural, 20% in urban areas. And it's, I think, 15 times bigger in terms of the last government scheme. So clearly this is going to drive both demand for quality healthcare, and at the same time one is now looking to deal with or rather interact with the government to have an impact. So with your experience of working from a venture private equity perspective, how do you see to create an impact, engagement with the government, and if so, where do you see the bottlenecks which need to be removed or things which need to be done to tap into some of these initiatives?
Thanks, Alan. I'll just take a cue from what Charles had mentioned, that as far as the SDG3 goals are concerned, India needs about $850 billion, and 500 out of which will come from the government, and about 350 odd billion dollars from the private sector, which means that there is a need for government-private partnerships. So that's the first context. But just beyond money, I guess, given the importance of the sector not only in India emerging market, but globally. And given the impact that it can create on the society, I guess it is imperative to have that partnership, and the partnership needs to go beyond just the capital. We are fortunate to be investing through two pockets of fund that we have. One is Health Quad, where we partnered with Charles, which does early stage investment. And the way I look at it, if I look at it from a clinical pathway, that fund is mainly focused towards the early stage of the clinical pathway. The other fund is Quadria, where we invest in late stage growth capital fund, where we deal with mainly the secondary, tertiary care kind of models. And we can clearly see, the need of support from the government through the entire clinical pathway. Just before I get to the clinical pathway of how I see the partnership working, both in the early stage and the late stage, it starts much before and beyond healthcare. The biggest contribution that we can see from the government is to get the political commitment of getting the right industries to align that have indirect impact on healthcare. So if I talk about nutrition, if I talk about education, if I talk about sanitation, if we don't solve these issues, the burden on the healthcare as a sector goes high, which means more money, more resources going into it. So that's the first stage of government involvement, where I don't think the private sector in the healthcare ecosystem can do anything. It's the political commitment, it's all government support. If I now get to the direct involvement, and if I take the initial part of the clinical pathway, which is mainly screening the primary care, there again, globally what we've seen, and that's very relevant for a country like India, which has 1.2 billion population, vast geographic landscape, there is a high degree of government involvement required, mainly in the form of capacity building, which is to help the last mile healthcare delivery. Given that India is a huge, vast market with different topography, right across the country, reaching the last mile is a big issue. So while money can get you infrastructure, you can build, you can have buildings, you can buy equipment, because these are all, derivative of how much you spend. The big challenge that we're facing is capacity building, and that is where we need the government support. The private sector, funds like ours, entrepreneurs who we back, they have a huge role to play as well. And that again, on the side of capacity building, that can mainly happen through technology intervention. So if I just take a few examples, capacity building comes by way of education, skill building. Now technology is a very easy way to leapfrog that gap that we have today. But how do you get the technology to the last mile? How do you incentivize the community workers in the last mile area to come forward and try and educate themselves? So while the private sector can put money, can build technology, the government has to step in with their reach to bring those potential workers in the mainstream. So as far as the initial part of the clinical pathway is concerned, there's a heavy requirement of the government intervention. When we talk about the late stage, I think there the private sector has been taking up the load. So if I talk about secondary care or tertiary care, which are the latest stages of the clinical pathway, their private sector is playing an important role, and that is the way it is going to be and should be. There the intervention of government should be more as a regulator and financer. And the government has done a brilliant job, at least from an initiative perspective of working on something like Ayushman Bharat, where it is now financing, and we've now got 40% of the population coming into the mainstream healthcare. That's a fantastic thing. But what it should also do is play the role of a regulator, a positive regulator, not introduce something like a price cap. Let that be driven by the market, and let that be driven by the government's capacity to buy healthcare provision, rather than just capping the price. There, what we expect is, government obviously is going to be a payer. It should also, allow a level playing field for all the healthcare providers. It shouldn't be a case where, you have different types of healthcare providers, some being, accredited with NABH, which is the hospital accreditation certificate that hospitals in India get. And then, you are competing at the same price point with a hospital that doesn't have any accreditation. So where, so it's a limited government intervention, but it's very, very important. That's how you attract entrepreneurs who will come into the mainstream, set up infrastructure, and provide the healthcare provision. So from an initiative perspective, I feel the government has taken the right step, but it should, add few more elements to it to be able to attract the kind of capital that one needs. The other big element, so this was on the clinical pathway, the other big element that we should look at is, how do we cater to micro market distortions? It's a good opportunity for any private sector entrepreneur, and especially for investors like us who are able to invest behind those entrepreneurs and are able to make returns, but at the same time are able to create a huge amount of impact. When I call, what I call as micro market distortions is, I was reading yesterday that there are 5 states where the doctor to population ratio is less than 1 to 10,000 population. The India average is about 8 to 9 per 10,000, and the requirement as per WHO is about 23, 24 to 10,000. But there are 5 states in India which have the world's highest doctor to population ratio. The irony is that in the states where the ratio is 1, the government has not opened even a single hospital in last 50 years. Not hospitals, medical colleges in the last 50 years. And in the states which have the world's highest doctor to population average, they open 1 or 2 colleges every year. Now this is a clear micro market distortion. That's the definition that we find at Health Board. Now how do we solve this healthcare conundrum? Technology is the best way. The point that Charles was making, that you have to bridge the demand side with the supply side. And technology is the ideal way to do it. We've invested in companies that are doing telemedicine, and this is the right way to channelize those kind of technologies to be able to streamline the micro market distortions. And I think in all these elements, you see a good participation both from private sector and the government.
Thank you, Sunil. Clearly, few of your points which I can relate to running the USAID's PEHEL flagship intervention, that the community, the last mile is so important. And you may have as much innovation you need, but unless you have people reaching out with solutions, you really can't do much, both on preventive and primary. But to take a lead from that, can I, Rahul, ask your views from Nisha Desai, which is a legal firm, and you see technology leapfrog into India, and then you have the regulator and the regulations from the government side. So a huge gap which builds up. So that's one side. The second is, we have different pools of capital to build these community-centric models, which are kind of working in isolation. CSR is a great example. It can perhaps mobilize close to $3 billion and strengthen some of the systems which can cater to some of the problems being solved by private entrepreneurs. How do you see the gap, and where do you see it, which the regulator and needs to change, and a few changes can actually have a large impact?
Thanks, Alan. My co-panelists actually have made a lot of good points and talking about technological innovation that we have seen in the healthcare sector. It's a pity that while on the technology side we have made great progress, and there have been many several new models that have come up within the marketplace. Unfortunately, the laws and the regulatory regime that we have in India do not really have moved at a parallel pace with those innovations. For example, taking the example of telemedicine. Now, let's assume for a minute that a doctor who practices in Bombay wants to operate or wants to, a patient from Chhattisgarh wants to consult a doctor who is in Bombay. Now, there are technologies that can be used wherein you can bridge the gap, and the patient and the doctor can consult each other, and medicines can be prescribed. Now, the prescription that will have to be followed would be an e-prescription. It's not physically possible for the patient from Chhattisgarh to travel 2,000 miles to Bombay to buy medicines. He or she will have to use that prescription to buy medicines at a local dispensary. Now, under Indian laws, without having a physical prescription, find it very difficult to buy medicines. The Information Technology Act allows you to use your digital signature, and that gives credibility to your document. However, the convergence of Information Technology Act and Drugs and Cosmetic Act is still to come at par. So although we have such innovations like telemedicines, when we operate on the ground, we see a lot of patients who are not actually able to make proper use of this facility because of the way regulators have not understood the right application of law. Take for another example, a doctor who is based out of Delhi would want to visit Jammu and Kashmir and set up health camps there. Now, under Indian law, the health sector is federal as well as state-led. So it's a subject on which states can also regulate as well as center can also regulate. So for each and every state, you have state-specific medical councils. Now, a doctor that practices in a particular state will have to be regulated per the regulations that are prescribed under medical council of that particular state. For that doctor to now go and practice in a different state is a challenge. While under the Constitution of India, there is a right to freedom of movement, freedom of trade, practice and profession. So a doctor prescribing a certain kinds of drug in a different state may, he or she may find it difficult to actually practice there because of these specific issues. Other example that I can give of is talking about another innovation. So of late we've been seeing a lot of startups trying to enter this marketplace, model wherein they're trying to get into the business of medicine delivery. Now the basic problem with that in India is the pharmacy laws are still as old as dinosaurs, right? So now under the pharmacy regulations, a pharmacist can only sell medicines through a brick or mortar structure or model. So it's very difficult for a startup to have a model wherein they do not have a premise where they store these medicines, right? Under Indian laws, you can only buy medicines through these brick and mortar structure. So if you have a startup, you want to connect those patients to dispensaries and provide courier services through which these medicines are going to be transported to these patients or to these caregivers. It's going to be a challenge. It is also one of the reasons why we have not seen a lot of startups that have come up based on these aggregator models, and a few that have come up have also not been very successful, precisely for the reason that the law still envisages a setup to be very much following a brick or mortar system, and if you have e-prescriptions, then that always is going to be an issue unless Drugs and Cosmetic Act and specific pharmacy regulations are going to be amended. That's more on the legal side wherein we need to step up. In terms of compliances too, I think we are quite lagging. One of the issues that we regulators have not really thought through much, and we as industry experts really need to think about is the coming big mess of biomedical waste, biohazardous waste and radioactive waste. A lot of hospitals that we have in India in tier 2, tier 1, tier 3 cities, even in dispensaries and such other places, they are, while regulated through pollution control boards, the compliances are very lackluster, right? The government does not really care much about what happens after a certain medical device or certain equipments are used. It's generally just thrown away. So ecology is going to be a big challenge which healthcare sector needs to visit and understand. And there can be a lot of technological innovations around the e-waste management system that we need to all of us need to understand and cater to, and probably as an industry we need to step up in terms of how do we regulate that. Apart from that, another important issue that I see coming, two important issues rather. One, the pricing aspect, and two, the ratio of our GDP into healthcare is increasing and will increase even further, but we also have to be mindful of the demographic dividend factor that we will have for another 2 decades, but beyond 2030, the contribution of GDP into healthcare will be more towards, elder care, right? So the kind of insurance products that we need to come up with will also have to be very innovative. In terms of pricing, to give an example, a few state governments tried to, put a cap on pricing that hospitals could charge from patients. State of Karnataka tried doing that, state of West Bengal tried doing that, and they are trying to copy it from the education model, wherein a lot of state governments have specific statutes that mandate schools to put a cap on the fee that they can be charging from students in terms of books and things like that. So taking a cue from that model, a lot of state governments have also tried to put a cap on process the amount of money that you pay for medication. There has been a backlash, and now the rules have changed and it's only applicable to government hospitals. However, in the longer run, we do foresee a lot of public interest litigations that could be filed before High Courts and Supreme Courts in the name of public interest, wherein the state would try to probably use a more socialist and welfare-based model to argue that, look, we need to put a cap on this. So these are few issues that the sector needs to understand, and we'll have to be mindful of these aspects. Especially, I think on the pricing part, I foresee a lot of disputes happening in coming years for sure.
So thank you, Rahul. So I'll just take the last, in fact, from the people sitting on the side, a question from Ankur Capital. Krishna, you guys have been an impact investor, investing, working in communities, and so what have your experiences been in terms of creating impact, solving some of these problems? Where do you see what can be done more?
So I'll just pick up from some of the comments the earlier speakers have made, and clearly the last mile challenge is very much there. But I think that's where I would put it in the context of what we're seeing in terms of technology, innovation, right? And I think while there are some of these legal issues that still need to be sorted out on the ground. So what we also see sometimes is a disconnect between, like Rahul mentioned, what is there within the IT Act in terms of enabling and what is there in the local level regulation as well as the local level administration. But I think I would see another positive side of the technology innovation which I just want to share, which is also what is happening to address the quality issue. So there is one a lack of adequate access to infrastructure, but the other issue that also exists, and one of the speakers also talked about how there is a skew in terms of the generation of good quality medical professionals. And one of the solutions to that is really about how do you use technology and how do you use innovations, including artificial intelligence, to have devices and solutions which are able to overcome some of these challenges of the need to have a qualified doctor or a qualified radiologist at the point of care, right? So beyond the telemedicine itself, and if I were to give you an example, one of the companies in our portfolio is trying to address exactly the situation we talked about the high mortality rate in breast cancer patients, right? And in the Indian context, that happens because awareness is low, there is no last mile access to proper screening, right? And what these guys are doing is trying to use a thermography with an overlay of artificial intelligence to analyze scans and actually detect it much earlier. And because the form factor of the device allows it to be much cheaper, because the whole user experience is much better, they're able to get the product out into low resource settings, and more importantly, conduct it at a very low cost, and actually based on the clinical trials that have happened till now, at a much better sensitivity and specificity than what mammography is able to do. So I think that angle of technology, is actually very important. We are seeing innovations like that, looking at other applications, whether it be related to cardiac care, whether it be related to kidney ailments and eye care. And I think that's a very important aspect of technology that we see a lot of potential in, because the shortage of good quality, this healthcare professionals is not going to go away tomorrow. And this is not just about doctors, but also paramedicals. And I think this is a great way to try and address the gap. The second aspect that I just want to talk about in the context of the last mile is also that while there may be some of these, let's say, legal constraints, what we have seen is that there are more stakeholders in the ecosystem who seem to be coming together to attack this problem. So, and we see it very closely from the experience of one of our own assisted telemedicine-based companies, right, who have been able to move from a model where it was only about running their own centers and trying to deliver the solution to customers in remote areas, to one where they're actually seeing very active participation or support from one set of it is companies through their CSR. And here it is not about running a center on a charitable model for perpetuity, but really about coming in and catalyzing and providing seed capital, if you will, to get the center to a sustainable level in, say, a couple of years. Because when you go into these areas, there is a significant need to build trust with the community, and that's a process that takes some amount of time. Whatever, you can't just throw capital at the problem. So we are seeing them coming in as significant stakeholders. We are seeing that a couple of PPP models have been piloted, and again, what's interesting there is that it's allowing this young startup with the innovation and with the leverage of technology to actually take that little bit of extra time to get their model sustainable. So our view is that the fact that you're seeing more stakeholders coming in and trying to attack this problem, right, is what is going to help get the regulatory framework also resolved, right, over a period of time, and in the process also attack that $300 odd billion of deficit that we need to get in beyond government funding.
Very good. So Krishna, you made a point about all the stakeholders coming together, and I think I'll open it up for discussion to get everyone's view. But so let me start with Ramona. Actually, Ramona, welcome from, she's the Deputy Mission Director at USAID. Clearly the role of donors in countries like India has been evolving, changing. And since I run the innovative financing platform on behalf of USAID, how do you see the role of impact investing and your program-related work which you've been doing versus what you're seeing as opportunities? How do you really see donors further catalyze this sector?
I think the role, of course, so we're trying to be more nimble, more flexible. We're looking to different partnerships where we can support policy dialogue or something. We would certainly be willing to do that as well. I think, although I'm not sure that's needed here in India, I think that's quite well advanced. But it's a matter of the areas that I think the donor partners, the development partners bring to this dialogue is looking at the monitoring and evaluation and the impact, and being able to bring that to the forefront of impact investing, and making sure that when an impact investor is ready to look at a different sector, that we can help measure the impact, that we know we've been in the field for so many years, that we know where there are potentials. We've done a lot of testing, we have a lot of models. We also look towards working with startup companies and new innovations and technologies. So we take a lot of risks ourselves, right? We're not looking for a return on our investment. So we're probably at the forefront of being your risk partners in this engagement, and ready to share that experience with you all, so that you can bring your experience, your expertise, the financial capital as well to this dialogue.
Thank you. And as if anyone has a question or answer they would like to share with you, I would welcome those who come from outside as well as those who are involved in the sector. Sean, let me ask a question. You seem to be flying a lot from Australia, Singapore, India, and obviously you see potential in the sector here. So from I understand you're looking at impact bonds, or you've been doing some of that work in Australia. So from an India context, where do you see opportunities on innovative financing? I know Charles has done a lot in terms of, and we again at USA are looking at it. I'd love to hear your views.
Thank you, Alan. So what we've seen, while social impact bonds are a valuable tool, by no means are they a panacea, a silver bullet. And you need a confluence of several factors to make these worthwhile and relevant to the sector. The first is you need a payer who's ultimately bearing a cost of some sort of outcome you're trying to prevent. You need measurable results, and you need an evidence base to actually capture the intervention and the efficacy of your causality of your intervention leading to that result. And I think healthcare brings together a confluence of these factors in a powerful way. What we've been doing, Global Strategy Partners, our firm, we're an investment bank and consulting firm based in Australia, which focuses on impact investment globally. We've been partnering with Stanford Medical School on using artificial intelligence for precision prevention. I'll start with the Australia story and then link it back into India. So in Australia, we've worked with the Victorian government, which is our second most populous state, on putting together a social impact bond to finance artificial intelligence at the point of care for doctors using the technology from Stanford to prevent chronic disease conditions like heart failure, stroke, diabetes, and atrial fibrillation. The reason it's relevant in Australia with our Medicare scheme, the government foots the bill when that happens. Now, there's a few complexities around the way that's split between the state and Commonwealth, but effectively, the government pays for the vast majority of healthcare within the Australian system. But the beauty of using artificial intelligence in healthcare is it means it's a globally scalable model. And we found that in our engagement across India, the US, and UK. So in the UK, we're working with the Chief Digital Health Officer at the NHS on looking at structuring a similar social impact bond for the UK, along with Big Society Capital. In India, where we've seen the opportunity, it comes at two levels. The ultimate goal for us, in an ideal case, once Ayushman Bharat has ironed out the initial wrinkles and landed, would be to work with the Indian government and do a social impact bond on chronic disease prevention for primary healthcare at the point of care. And that could be on mobile phones. So we're working together with Narayana Health in Bangalore, who've partnered with a group called, with Microsoft, with a product there called Kaizala, which is it's kind of like a WhatsApp messaging platform, but they've actually repurposed it for sharing medical data. But the beauty would be you could drive precision prevention AI on mobile phones at the point of care and for the doctors. So we're currently working through the mechanics of that integration. And so ideally you would do it where you say, look, if there's a 5 lakh budget per family, if I can shift that trend to say the average spend of 3 lakh for the areas I cover, the Indian government keeps 1 lakh and our investors take the other lakh. That's how we feel this would ultimately reach scale. That would be the long-term goal, or hopefully mid-term. The short-term way we're tackling it so we can get this moving is to target some of the large employer groups. So talking with groups like State Bank of India, right? Because if you look at their employee base, if we were to do just for their employees and the employee health benefit scheme, that would tackle a lot of people. Similarly, in Gurgaon and Bangalore, we're talking to the MNC clusters in Gurgaon here, as well as in Whitefields in Bangalore, with Narayana and Vedanta respectively. So to us, that allows us to get moving in the market, because you've got a private sector payer who is bearing these costs, which are rapidly escalating for these corporations, which we can then tie in. But ultimately, it's driven off that AI from the staff.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. So look, you do make a good point that in a country or a system where the resources are scarce, there's a higher need for preventive care and sort of avoiding these catastrophic expenses. Nearly 40 million odd Indians go into poverty every year thanks to either lack of insurance or detecting it too late. So there is a need to sort of drop both efficiency on capital and early detection. May I request anyone else who may want to share the views on the sector who's been involved? Philippe, would you want to add something from your side? Yes.
I think I like that. So I think our approach is a bit different. Lawson Foundation, our tagline is improving lives through invention, so we're very much about technology invention. We've been investing in India for about 15 years, and I think we see the ecosystem. So for 15 years, we've invested in Pilbara, which is an incubator. We've now invested in Intera, which is a fund, Encore Capital, which is a fund. So we see providing capital for the seed stage companies from the very beginning. We've also funded some educational programs. For medical device, we funded from the beginning through the incubation, through the seed stage. We've now just invested in another fund, Team Fund, which is a new one to scale up the medical devices. We've also done interventions with the company. We were the first to use Masala bonds in a philanthropic manner. We've also just provided a standby letter of credit for a medical device company because they couldn't get receivable financing. So we see our role as to following a seed stage company from beginning to scale. And we also see our role as a philanthropic investor to be catalytic and try to bring others in. So the Masala bonds, I'm happy to say we are seeing maybe 6 other transactions coming through. We hope that other people, we also provide technical assistance for companies through Encore. So we're trying to figure out how do we surround these companies with the necessary sort of wrapping to get them to scale. We've also working with Wish Foundation to help get some of the medical devices, in Rajasthan and in hospitals. So kind of, we see our role across the whole ecosystem.
Excellent. Let me ask you a question, Pradeep, who has the Ford Foundation in India. You've been seeing across, different industries, and especially on the healthcare side. What is your view in terms of what is admired? Because you do deal with government, private. How do you really see the sector can be catalyzed to meet the goals it has?
First of all, I agree with, of all the breakout sessions, this is the one that I came to attend. I guess it's that itself for 4. I think we are betting a lot on healthcare. We're not, as an organization, making grants. The last couple of years, we moved away from healthcare for various reasons. But I think in the impact investing portfolio that we're looking at, for all the reasons the two of you especially spoke about, the sheer numbers, I think it's a no-brainer that whether you're someone looking to make money, like several people here are, there's nothing wrong with that. Whether you are here trying to solve problems, I think 600 to 700 million people not having access to healthcare itself is a very strong case for anyone who wants to work in the impact space. Forget about investing. That if you were to pick a sector, you would want to pick a sector which affects about 7% of India's population. If you were to look at, if you want, for us, for example, one of our metrics for getting into a sector is, believe it or not, a sector which does have a lot of regulations is a metric actually for us to get into because of the kind of organization I guess we are. And even from that perspective, I guess it checks the box as a sector where there are a lot of regulations, and so you might not really see a lot of people get in as easily as the other sectors. So I can list 5 other reasons like this, but I think for all of these reasons alone, I think this is an amazing sector to get into, whether you're an investor, whether you're a grant maker, whether you're a organization trying to work on regulations and all of that. Now coming to the government, I think it is early days with the new Modi care, but having said that, I think most of us will agree that the best time to work in some sector is during the early days, right? I mean, if you can get in, either working along with the government, which also is equally important, or working not along but outside the government, informing them as they try to figure out which of these policies and schemes are working and not working, are all very required. And we cannot wait to try to figure out how we can get involved in one way or the other. It's not going to be easy, I think, and all of us know that, but I think that's why we all have a job, because this is a very interesting sector to work in.
Good, thank you. So may I ask anyone else if they may have a view? Yes, sir. You may just want to introduce yourself as well, and then we can keep it brief. Thank you.
My name is Arvind Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of a social enterprise that aims to provide quality health care at affordable prices in rural sector, in rural areas. Monak, a small town in district Sangrur in Punjab. population 19,000, is the headquarter of this pilot project. We basically are trying to change the paradigm. Why does the patient have to travel to the facility? What could we do other way around to take the facility closer to people? So this was the effort to use miniaturization in telecommunication to bring things closer to people. We started this program 3 years ago and have had very gratifying results. The unit is fully equipped like an OPD of a good hospital. It has a full facilities, an ultrasound, an ECG, a full lab. It has pharmacy, it has doctor, it has paramedical staff. And the idea being that we go to these villages or big villages which are the collection points on a pre-agreed frequency. So it's like a Monday we are here, Tuesday we are here. And the focus is to keep intensive service, so maximum 25 kilometers population is being covered. So the total area population we cover is about 140,000 population. And that itself, the first thing we were testing was, will people pay? That was the first question we were asked. Luckily, I'm not from a health background, so I said, what the hell, let's give it a try. And we were surprised, people found it value, because an option for them is to travel 40, 50 kilometers to a center. So the point about the last mile connectivity you made is very valid. The second thing we found that because we had the diagnostic equipment, the early detection, which is the other point I think that was raised, a lot of the cost of the healthcare goes exponentially if you detect it late. By making sure we're going early, people were a lot more amenable to try. And of course, we kept the prices very affordable. Our doctor for the first consultation charges 40 cents, US cents for a consultation. An MBBS doctor with 10 plus years of experience. So I think we, in a way, it was something that we've attempted. It's called, in our colloquial area, it's called Chalta Firta Hospital, Mobita. So it's a mobile as in moving, and Chalta Firta in Indian means exactly the same word. And of course, we are trying to now take the second part of the teleconsultation on the back of that with the specialist and super specialist care. So I think I agree with all the comments made here. It is very compelling, but not easy because obviously a lot of hard work that goes in the last mile.
Thank you, Arvind. I think yes, travel expense or movement is a big problem, expense as well as nuisance. So clearly that's a value we see. Sunil, you would like to add before we conclude for the night?
Yeah, no, one of the, it was really heartening to know how he started the model, and I think, if we try and turn the model on its head and do something very simple and basic, I think we'll be able to solve, a lot of big problems. So something like, this kind of an initiative, not being started in a place like Chandigarh or Delhi, itself solves half the problem because you are dealing with it at the core of that sector. You would right from day one know what the issues are. Instead of sitting in Delhi, creating a, grand plan and then executing in a place like Mumbai. So that's the first thing. The second, in our experience, and we've been interacting quite a bit with the government, we've seen that, the government is ready to listen to entrepreneurs and funds like us. If we come up with innovative solutions, especially on the primary care side, the early stage side, there is a lot of political noise and issues around the later stage. You go and talk to the government on the secondary and tertiary care, they will not give a damn. But if you go and talk to the government, open a dialogue that this is what we want to solve and this is the way we want to solve on the primary care side, the government is ready to listen. That's a big change. And some of these governments, I was reading, in fact, yesterday, Tamil Nadu is now hiring 10,000 nurses to man 10,000 clinics. It's a brilliant idea. They just thought that no point going after doctors who are going to charge millions and billions. Let's start with the nurses. Because if we are able to solve 80% of the primary care needs, the burden on the secondary and tertiary care goes down. And it's not only about a problem in developing country, even in the developed markets, here the issue is access, there the issue is cost. And people are now turning it around and saying that focus more on prevention, spend more on the preventive side and less on the later stage. So if you start doing, this is a very It's a common sense, why can't you start something in a village? But people are used to that, trying to solve a third world problem with a first world mindset. That doesn't work.
So I'll wind up, and my sort of firstly, thank you all for being here, patiently hearing everyone's view. My personal take is that India is really at an inflection point. What one saw, if you look back in the financial inclusion model, started by people like Muhammad Yunus, which became Grameen Capital, and then led to the whole microfinance industry. I think in India today, you are at an inflection point in healthcare. Clearly, you have people who've made this wealth in the last 20 years who can contribute. You have a talent pool, you have smart coders, you have entrepreneurs, and we have donors and other foundations looking to support. So if we can combine all this collective wisdom and effort, I personally feel that this aggregates to more than a $10 trillion economy globally. This is probably the third largest economy in the world if you look at it from a cost perspective. And I think that India can really lead the way to not only solve problems for its own people, but also lead the way for global innovation and cost reduction and access. So thank you all. For the lack of time, I think we have to wind it, but you're more than welcome to continue. So I want to thank all of you for being in this panel and sharing your views. Thanks.